Assalamualaikum. Hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm back again this week with another video. आप लोगों ने इससे पहले देखी होगी a video on the Afghan refugee crisis, जहाँ Asoomii Jay went to give aid to those people. और मैं भी उनके साथ थी. इत्तेफाक से हमारी मुलाकात हुई और अब दोस्ती भी हो गई है. So I want you all to get to know a little bit more about her. So Asoomii Jay, why don't you say salam to my viewers?
Assalamu alaikum. So happy to be here.
And I'm happy to have you here. So Asoomii Jay, why don't you tell us a bit about your experience and how you got involved with activism and social work?
So I started my social media activism in 2011. I'm culturally Canadian, born and raised Canadian, but from a Middle Eastern, North African background. So I was between two worlds. I guess you could say I had an identity crisis. I could never fit in with the Canadian community nor the Muslim community. And growing up in Canada, I was always made to feel like I was not welcome. So based on my personal experience of bullying, being made to feel excluded from my own community, as well as the Islamophobia as we see in recent years, it's gotten worse, especially post 9/11. As we saw in the States, the Chapel Hill shooting, the Charlie Hebdo situation in Europe, I was compelled to speak up against Islamophobia. I first started off with the concept of modest fashion. As a young girl growing up in North America as a Muslim, again, it was very hard to kind of fit in. So I wanted to show young girls that they could fit in as well as hold on to their faith through the concept of modest fashion. But then when I witnessed the war in Libya in 2014, as well as fighting cancer, around that time as well, I decided to use my existing social media platform to raise awareness on social injustices. So when I was in Libya, there wasn't a lot of news coverage on what was happening, and the stories that were being shown in the news wasn't actually the reality. So I took it upon myself to try to share the truth. From there, I got into humanitarian aid because of what I saw was happening in Libya.
You wanted to do something.
I wanted to do something about it. So speaking up was good, but I wanted to be able to do something a little bit more and hopefully encourage others to pay it forward.
And I'm sure that experience has been none like any other. So you've been working with activism for quite a few years, and I've seen your journey through the internet, and you've been very involved. So what brought you to Pakistan for this specific cause, for the Afghan refugee cause? What drew you in?
So first of all, I've always wanted to visit Pakistan for years, and when my friend told me that she was currently in Pakistan, Aviza, she's a London-based Afghani designer, and she wanted to be able to give back to her community. And because of my experience with humanitarian aid distribution, she reached out to me. So I was actually made aware about the Afghan crisis when I was invited to King's College in London in 2016. So I learned about the situation where there's a lot of civilians caught between the clashes, not enough emergency and ambulance aid, and it was just horrific to find out all this was happening and people aren't aware, the world is not aware, you know.
Yeah.
So I was on board, I came.
So Jay, I want to know about the obstacles that you faced coming here to do humanitarian work. What were some of the challenges and setbacks that you faced?
So a lot of people initially were warning me, oh, you're a woman going by yourself to the Pakistan-Afghan border, and it's going to be very unsafe and you need security. But we went to Women. It was very safe. The people were so kind, so beautiful, so welcoming, hospitable, and honestly, as long as you respect the people and the culture, you should have no issues at all. And so there was no issue there. I think the only thing that I had, there was a setback in, was people's political opinion. So on social media, when I advertised that I was going and I was fundraising, there was some backlash, I believe, from the Pakistani community more so than anyone else. Yes. They wanted the Afghanis out. They said they should go back to their country, they've been here long enough, but what they don't understand is that there's nowhere to go back to. They'll be going back into conflict areas, as we saw this week. Last week, every week there's bombs going off, there's crisis and conflict that's still happening. So first of all, we need to be helping these people, not kicking them out. We need to be looking at them as one of our own and not as outsiders. That's the problem. When we keep looking at each other as outsiders or us versus them, we're never gonna have that middle ground. So instead of building bigger walls, we're supposed to be building a longer table. Forget about the stereotypes, and the best way to get to know someone, learn about something, is to go firsthand and experience it yourself. And if you have stereotypes about Afghanis, visit the Afghani camps. Go yourself.
Instead of just making assumptions.
Exactly.
So how did this experience at this refugee camp differ from the other refugee camps that you have been to before? And what were also some similarities that you saw there?
The previous refugee camps at the Syrian border, because the Syrian conflict is very new, it's 5 years now? A few years. So they were all makeshift camps, just tarps, cardboard boxes, whereas this camp, they've been there for almost 40 years. As I said, they have nowhere to go back to. The conflict is still going on. So that was a difference, that they were a little bit more settled in a sense that they were given the land, they made their own homes made out of clay, as you saw, but there's nothing. There's no running water, there's no electricity, it's basically empty. So the difference there is the situation, how long it was. Now the similarities was the desperation and the poverty. For me, the Afghani kids were the same exact as the Syrian children. When I bought the toys, when I bought the books, because my focus is mainly on the children, I want to be able to give them that sense of innocence, that hope. A lot of them have been going through psychological trauma. Exactly, and they've been going through trauma. And we want them to grow up not with the concept of seeking revenge, for example. We want them to be able to have hope and humanity. The world is actually good.
Yeah.
The world is loving, that there's good people out there.
Compassion.
Compassion, exactly.
What do you want Pakistanis to know about the Afghan refugees living in their country, and how can they help?
I really want the Pakistani community to look at the people, look at the situation, and put aside politics. For a second, just think about humanity. Look at those children, because when I went to this Afghani camp, there was a young boy who looked exactly like my little brother. Like, you could say they were twins. And that's when it hit me. That could be my brother.
Yeah.
That could be my father. That could be me. The only difference is that I was lucky and fortunate enough to be born into the life that I have today, but they weren't.
So the growing number of refugees the world over is a result of many wars that are ongoing in different regions. And that is being addressed as an issue by all of those countries that are, considering either taking in refugees or maybe keeping them out or pushing them back. It's being addressed as an issue. So do you think that attitude needs to change? And how should it change? And lastly, is there a double standard when it comes to certain types of refugees?
Yes, it is an issue. We need to change the way that we think. So a lot of people say we have enough refugees, we don't want them coming in, we already have our own economical problems, for example. Well, the refugees aren't affecting that. That's, for example, corruption of your own government, You should be dealing with that and keep the refugees out of it. You can bring in more qualified people. So the stereotype people have is, refugees are going to bring in problems. Well, actually,
there'll be a liability.
When you look at so many big inventions and companies, they're all coming from refugees. Steve Jobs, a child of refugees. You have doctors, lawyers, scientists. They can bring in so much. And that's the mentality that we have to switch.
How does this experience, this work that you do, how does this fulfill you? Does this add to your life in a certain way? And maybe people can, relate to this or maybe learn something from this and understand, the level of fulfillment that you get from doing this sort of work. So how is that for you?
So in the Western world, or Western civilization or society, you see that there's an increased level of depression. People don't feel like they fit the image that they're supposed to be living. And so we forget to be grateful. We aren't thankful for our blessings. And suicide rate is increasing. But then, and I suffered depression for a long time in the Western society, but then when I would go to areas of conflict and I would see children who lost their parents, people who lost their homes, women who lost their husbands and their children, and they're still thankful. This is all from God, I'm grateful, whatever so remind you to be grateful. It's a humbling, eye-opening experience, and I always recommend that if you're able to do such a project, do it. Not for paying it forward, but what I always tell people is that we think that we're going to save these children, but in fact they're the ones saving us.
And that's a very important point you just brought up. I don't think a lot of people look at it that way. The fact that we're not going there to save them, you know. It's not like we're doing something that, you know, big in the grand scheme of things, but they're saving us. And that's really important that you brought that up. Thank you so much for joining me, Asoomii Jay. And I'm so happy to have you. I'm so glad I got to meet you. And I'm so glad that, you know, I got to experience you doing what you do firsthand.